right, welcome to the third lecture for Unit 9. So we're calling this one Lecture 8, Part 3. As usual, I want to start with our weekly outline. You got a little bit of a busy week ahead of you. You have your lecture video that you need to listen to. You have your Unit 9 readings, which you have 2 from your online textbook that is listed in Teams in the general channel under that ushistory.org site. You're going to read 48B and 48E. Then you have the Great Depression in Global Perspective. You have the first 100 days and the farmer's plight. We'll have our online class on Wednesday, so we need to log on to the Zoom. And then Thursday, you are set to do the Great Depression New Deal document analysis. This is a little different than what you're used to. You have 4 different websites that you're going to go look at, and at each of those sites, you're going to select one image to evaluate using the document analysis questions. Make sure you're following the directions for that assignment, and any questions you let me know. And then on Friday, you have an assignment that we've gotten used to at this point. You're going to read one of the fireside chats from FDR and evaluate what he was talking about in that fireside chat to the nation. So you have 3 assignments that are due this week by midnight, your Journal 23 on your readings and on the lecture video. And then you have the Great Depression New Deal document analysis and the fireside chat evaluation, all due Friday by midnight. All right, let's get down to it. Today we are starting the Great Depression. We're going to get into the causes and start looking at some of the effects. We're going to get right up to the election of 1932. Before we get there, though, we kind of have to backtrack a little bit and talk about what got us the Great Depression in the first place. So let's start with the basics. Let's look at the business cycle. The business cycle is a continuous economic cycle that it really cannot be stopped. We go through this cycle in our history. We can see it up until this point. We'll see it in modern day history. There is many factors that can speed up and slow down this cycle, but the cycle is inevitable nonetheless. So what are the different pieces that we have here? First, we have prosperity. This one is the easiest to remember because during the prosperity section of the business cycle, we're going to see lots of business activity, production, buying and selling goods. Wages, prices, profits are all going to be high while unemployment is very low. Consider this the beginning of the 1920s, that encouragement of the businesses by the government led us to the consumer revolution. We have lots of buying, we have lots of selling, we have lots of jobs. Everything as far as the economic side of things looks pretty great. But what we're going to look at today is there is a recession period. And during this period, we are starting to go down. You see on the image there, indicated by the red arrow, we are moving. The economy is starting to slow down. Business activity slows down. There's going to be less production, less buying, less selling. Consider this the point where everybody has the products that are out there. There's only so many products that you can buy, and most of the time you only need one. Think of the washing machine, think of the car, think of the iron, all of these new technologies that we talked about that are going to make household activities a little bit easier. You're not going to continuously buy new ones. So people start to slow down on their buying. If we're slowing down on our buying, that obviously goes with slowing down on selling. And if people aren't buying as much, then we aren't going to produce as much. Because of these factors, wages, prices, and profits are going to start to fall. Prices start to fall in order to encourage people to buy. If prices are falling, businesses aren't making as much, wages are going to start to go down. If people aren't buying as much, of course, profits go down. And all of these factors encourage employment to rise. Now, depression is the bottom of the barrel. We hit the trough, as you can see on the image there. This is where we're going to see business activity be extremely low. Very little is going to be being produced. Very little is bought. Very little is sold. Wages, prices, profits are extremely low. Unemployment is very high. Many people are out of work. And the depression, as you can see, I'm repeating myself from the recession, but the recession leads into the depression. The depression magnifies those issues that were beginning during the recession. And just like everything else, once you hit rock bottom, you have to come back up or at least start coming out. And that is where we hit the recovery phase of this business cycle. During the recovery phase, we start to see business activity improve, production improve, buying improve, selling improve. And because each of these different factors is rising, you're going to see along with that wages increase because we're going to be able to pay our workers more because we're selling more. Prices are going to increase because more people are buying. We feel comfortable with raising the prices in order to make more money. Profits start to rise because more people are starting to buy. And with these factors, unemployment starts to fall because we need people working. We need to increase production. And then eventually we'll hit that peak, we'll hit the recession, we'll hit the trough. We'll keep moving through this business cycle. And like I said, this is inevitable in history, but the impact, how far we fall into the depression, how bad that depression gets, those are factors that change, but the cycle remains the same. So let's look at a little bit of background at the time that we're talking about right now. First, let's define a bull versus a bear market. A bull market is a market that's on the rise where the economy is sound. A bear market exists in an economy that is receding, recession, where most stocks are declining in value. When we look at the 1920s, during those Republican Party presidencies, we see a rise in the stock market where we'll label it a bull market. Okay, we'll hit a bear market today, but what we're talking about during the Republican presidencies is that bull market. So during the Republican presidencies, why do we hit the bull economy? Well, we hit it because of those conservative policies, because of those pro-business policies, such as the high tariff, returning to laissez-faire economics, returning to laissez-faire policies in general from the government that hands off, let the businesses grow, let's not hamper any of their income. We're heading into that less progressive tax policy, which means that we are backing off on taxing the wealthy in order to encourage that trickle down theory of economics, where if the wealthy have more money in hand, they would create more jobs or they would stimulate the economy through investments. And those are that's the pattern that we see in both Harding and Coolidge's presidencies in 1920 and 1924. Those policies create the bull economy. We had rising prices of stocks, and the problem here was the rising prices that we saw not only in the stock market but on those consumer goods had very little base in reality. Go back and think about, how do prices rise? What creates a rise in prices? Well, remember, we have to increase the demand, decrease the supply, and then price will increase with demand. But when we're selling these products, when we're decreasing the supply and increasing the demand, people are buying through modes that they aren't really putting real money into the economy. Remember, we're using installment buying. We're using buying on credit. In the stock market, we're using that buying on margin, which is all just fancy ways of saying people put a small money down, but then the rest is, in theory, a loan. It's not real money. These products aren't fully paid off. So on the outside, it looks like we're selling and making money, but on the inside, through further inspection, you see that it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. There's a small, tiny man behind the curtain. There's a small, tiny amount of money that's actually been brought in, and the economy shows otherwise. And this all indicates that there will be a depression ahead. So let's look at the causes of this depression because there are many. First and foremost, we're going to have the gap between the rich and the poor. The gap between the rich and the poor during this time period is going to become immense. The rich are going to become richer while the industrial workers become poorer. And this is in large part to the back off of the government on social practices, on business practices. The wealthiest 1% in 1929 are going to earn the same amount as the bottom 42%. That is an insane number. We are moving back to Gilded Age times where we have a majority of the wealth being held in a small number of people, while the mass number of the population is going to be living below poverty level. Those with less, those that don't have the money, are the ones that are borrowing money to buy items that they cannot afford, creating that Wizard of Oz effect in our economy. While on the flip side, the rich who have the money are not spending enough money. They're not investing enough. They're not putting it back into the economy that would keep this flowing. So we have poor people pretending to put money into the economy and the rich people squirreling it away, while this gap continues to increase and the poor get further into debt while the rich sit on the mound of money that could keep the economy going. Too many Americans did not have money to buy what they needed or wanted. Then another cause of the Great Depression is going to be overproduction. During the 1920s, businesses are going to just produce too much. They're going to produce more than what is being bought. And a lot of this comes from a few different factors. During that wartime economy, we finally figured out how to mass produce quickly. Okay, that's also coming from the Second Industrial Revolution, the Gilded Age. We learn how to perfect the art of mass production. And that's great initially, but the production doesn't slow down as consumers consume. So then, once everybody has a washing machine, we don't need to produce washing machines at the same rate. Same with the car. Ford was great at producing the automobile, but once everybody had one, we didn't need to mass produce it in the same way. So now we're producing too much. This is going to ultimately lead to businesses cutting back on production. And when businesses cut back on production, less workers are needed. When less workers are needed, we see unemployment start to rise. And this is all kind of lumping together. All of these causes relate. Because when Americans begin buying on credit the items that they can't afford, such as the automobiles, the appliances, the radios, the stocks, we start to see this lack of fear of debt. And this is going to be a huge factor in causing the Great Depression. Nobody's afraid to have debt at this point. Debt is a new concept, and everybody could get debt. Where today it's a little bit harder. We have credit scores. We look at how worthy you are to get a loan, basically, based on an arbitrary number. But we'll save that for another time. But at this time, everybody could get debt. Everybody could get a loan. It didn't matter who you were. You could buy, you could take home items that you couldn't necessarily buy on the spot that day, spending money that you don't have. And initially, that makes it look like we need a lot of items being produced in the United States, which has a hand in this overproduction initially. and overproduction and underconsumption go hand in hand here. Underconsumption just means that businesses are producing way more than people are buying. And we can go round and round and round on this again, but it's the same idea. When we overproduce, when people aren't buying enough, this leads to companies saying, okay, if we're not going to produce as much, then we don't need as many employees. This leads to layoffs. When people get laid off, though, this does not help when we're already headed towards a depression. Because if we have less jobs, that means we have more people that don't have money. In order to get out of the depression, we need people to spend. If they don't have jobs, they're not spending. And go back to that gap between the rich and the poor, the people who are spending are the people who are borrowing to spend, which is not real money going back into our economy. The people we're depending on, the rich, are not spending enough because, again, we're relying on that trickle down theory of economics, putting a lot of faith in the hands of the people who have the money. And quite frankly, that faith isn't going to get us out of a depression. So each of these three causes of the Great Depression are interconnected in this time period. We have a couple more big causes of the Great Depression, the banking practices. And again, you're going to hear these are all interconnected. Now, I need you at this time to remove all ideas that you know of the banks. If you know nothing about the banks, that's great. That'll help me here. During this time, anybody could get a loan. Nobody was discriminated against. Now, today, you can't just go and buy a car or go and buy a house and say, I need a loan. And the bank will say, yeah, sure, here you go, just take it. Now they ask you, what's your job? What's your income? How reliable have you been in the past? They look at if you've paid your bills, if you can afford the payment that they're about to ask from you for this loan. But during the 1920s, heck no. You want a loan? You get a loan. It's like Oprah. Everybody gets a loan. And that leads to issues because some people can't pay back that loan that they said they could. And if they can't pay back that loan, then we're defaulting and less money is going into the economy. We also have speculation on the market. Banks were taking the money that they had in their vaults and using it to kind of gamble in the market. So the speculation here, if the banks lost, then the banks wouldn't have the money in their vault in order for you to retrieve your money. So speculation, speculating in the fact that banks were hoping that they would increase the amount of money that they had in their vaults using the savings of others and be able to replenish it and then have more leads to, again, poor banking practices because if they lost, then when somebody came in and said, hey, I want my $500 that's in there was no guarantee that your money could be there. And the reason that this speculation was allowed to happen was that there were very few regulations on the market. Okay, the banks could do kind of whatever they wanted with your money, and we also are going to see customers having no clue where their money would be. They trusted the banks without having any proof that the banks would keep their money safe. If banks made bad investments in the stock market using speculation and were forced to close, the money of the customers would just be gone. And they had no obligation to pay it back, and they had no obligation to say what happened because there was no government regulation. They could literally do with whatever money was in their bank whatever they wanted. Now, this kind of works twofold because once we see bank closures because of these poor practices, if there was a rumor that a bank was going to close, people would be sent into an absolute panic. And if they even had an inkling that a bank was using these bad practices, they may rush to take all of their money out of the banks. Now, banks only work if they have money in them for people to withdraw from and put into. So, if all of the customers at a bank would go and take out their money and the bank had no money in it, then the bank would close. So bank runs were real, and we'll come back to that concept a little bit later on because that's going to be another major cause we need to discuss. Um, we have the Dust Bowl. Okay. When we see farmers moving out west, the western lands are much different, as we've discussed, than the southern lands. During the wartime economy, there was a huge need for the products that farmers were making, especially out west. Okay. We were not only producing for ourselves in the United States, but remember, we were producing for all of Europe. Remember, our allies needed us to produce for them. But after the war, the change in demand is not met in production. So when we get back to kind of regulating after the war and not needing to produce as much, farmers don't stop producing. And again, this is going to lead to overproduction, which leads to a decrease in prices. We've heard the same song and dance. I can keep saying it, but you know what's coming. When we have overproduction, the prices fall. Farmers fall into debt because they're not making as much. They're sitting on product that is going to go bad. All at the same time, we are going to see a depletion of the soil due to poor farming practices. Wheat crops would deplete the nutrients of the soil, making the land unsuitable for planting. Planting wheat in excess created the surplus, which drove the market down. So not only are we hurting the soil, but now we're hurting the price, and neither of those lead to anything good for farmers. Farmers are going to have to take out loans from the bank to buy equipment and land to make up for the price decrease that they were facing, and that's not going to lead to anything good because now the farmers are taking out loans to make product that they aren't going to sell, to buy land that they're going to destroy the nutrients of, and all of this equates to they're not bringing in enough income, which hurts the economy. A great source to look at in order to kind of get the feel of what was happening during this Dust Bowl is The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. A lot of times this is used on the Regents, hint, hint, wink, wink, to talk about the situation with the farmers. This is a well-known novel published in 1939, and it really evokes the harshness of the Great Depression and stoked sympathy for the struggles of the migrant farmer. This book is going to be regarded as an American classic for sure. So if you're interested in reading a little bit more, getting a little bit better perspective, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Pretty depressing, but so is this whole section. So why not just go head first? The causes of the Great Depression continued. High tariff. We have talked about this a million times, but here we go. Let's do it again. The high tariffs don't work. I can ask you, I'm going to hit this button, what's a tariff? And I can almost hear the echoes now. Tax on imported goods. Who does a high tariff protect? Oh, that's a great question, you ask. A high protective tariff protects American made products. Now, the Hawley Smoot tariff in 1930 is going to raise the prices of foreign goods to the point where they could not compete with American made goods, which creates a terrible situation for the United States. When we basically eliminate foreign competition in our markets, Europe is not going to look at this and be like, oh, yeah, that's totally fine. You want people to buy your products? Yeah, a tariff That's fine. No, European nations are going to create a protective tariff of their own. So we basically shoot ourselves in the foot while we're trying to get Americans to buy American made goods. We get Europe to say, yeah, well, we will do the same to yours because we need people to buy our goods if you're not going to sell our goods at a fair price. And this all boils down to the effect of World War I on European nations. World War I is going to absolutely decimate the European economy because much of the money being generated in Europe is needing to be put back into repairs. And these European nations are going to be left with little to no money to pay the tariff to sell or buy goods from the United States, which in turn hurts our economy because we cannot sustain a successful economy by only selling to Americans. It does not work that way. So the underconsumption of European and American buyers is going to hurt our production of goods even more and cause a higher unemployment rate in the United States. So while a high tariff in theory sounds like a great idea, it'll help go ahead and boost sales, it actually hurts us more than it helps us. And we're circling back to this idea of buying on margin that we talked about a couple of weeks ago in our Wednesday class. But buying on margin was that method of purchasing stocks in the stock market. When someone didn't have enough money to pay the full price of the stock, they could buy the stocks on margin. The buyer puts down a small amount of their own money. The broker puts down the rest of the stock price. If when the stock price rises, you sell, the broker would be paid back, the buyer gets their own money plus the difference. Theoretically, that's how it's supposed to work. And when it does work, the stock market is the get rich quick plan, which who doesn't want to get rich quick? When the demand of the stock was high, the supply of the stock is low, which takes the stock price and raises it. It's the same way that a product works. Okay? Americans, when they buy the stock on margin, they hope that the price is going to increase. And if you create this flurry in the stock market of people buying, 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 then the price goes up and up and up because the supply of stock is going down, down, down. But if the stock price goes down, that is when you have a problem. If you buy on margin and your stock price goes down, you still have to pay the broker back, which means you don't make any money. You're lucky if you make back exactly what you put in. But 9 times out of 10, if that stock price is going down, you're not going to make your money back. And sometimes you may not even be able to pay the broker back. And then when stock prices go down, what do people do? Well, they don't want to lose any more money if the stock price continues to fall. So they'll sell their stocks. And when they sell their stocks, they're increasing the supply, which brings down the price, which hurts the overall stock market. I know that sounds confusing, but if you need to listen back to that a couple of times to understand how the stock market can go up, go down, go up, go down. It really is emotionally based. And if people get scared that a stock market price is going to plummet, they will sell, driving the price down, maybe too quickly, prematurely. And some of that is what gives us the immediate cause, which is going to be the stock market crash. Stock prices had begun to decline in September and early October of 1829. So it's not as if this came out of nowhere, okay? Panic is going to start to set in on October 24th, which is known as Black Thursday, where a record of 12,894,650 shares are going to be traded. That is insane. Okay? investment companies and leading bankers are going to try to stabilize the market by buying up great blocks of stock. Now, think about it. They do this because if they buy up, they think they're going to create a demand for the stocks, which would drive prices up. So they're trying to save the stock market. And what this does is it produces a kind of moderate rally of the stock market. But on Monday, the storm is going to break and the market is going to go into free fall. We have Black Monday followed by Black Tuesday, which is October 29th, 1929. And this is going to be when the stock prices completely collapse. 16,410,030 shares are going to be traded on the New York Stock Exchange in one single day. Billions of dollars are going to be lost, wiping out thousands of investors, and stock tickers are going to run hours behind because the machinery could not handle this tremendous volume of trading. When we see this sell, this quick decrease in the stock market, the effect of buying on margin, the effect of speculating, the banks speculating on the market, is going to create this collapse of the economy because people aren't making the money that they thought they were going to make. Individuals who thought they were going to get rich quick do not get back the money that they invested. They cannot pay those brokers back. The banks are going to completely wash away what they needed to have in their vault to have their customers have access to. So banks are going to be in big trouble. Individuals are going to be in trouble. Brokers are going to be in trouble. Everybody is going to feel the effect of this stock crash. Okay, we are going to head into a little bit of the effects of the crash. We aren't going to be able to cover the effects and then go into Hoover and then go into FDR all into one day, but we are going to get into a little bit the initial feel of what happens after the stock market crashes here. One of the biggest problems that we have is going to be the bank failures. When we look at the failure of banks, this is just, it's a mess. The failure of banks comes from the lack of regulations on the banks, letting the banks do whatever they wanted. First and foremost, we are going to have bank runs. What happens here is that people are going to get nervous and they are going to be extremely susceptible to rumors of the impending doom of financial disaster. Consumer spending and investments are going to start to decrease. When that decreases, we see in turn a decline in production and employment. And then what we see compounding on top of all of this is the Great Depression is going to lead to a wave of bank panics, or what we call bank runs. During that time, a large number of very anxious people are going to rush to the banks, like you see in that top picture there, and they are going to demand to withdraw their deposits in cash. This forces banks to liquidate all loans, leading to the bank's failure. And then you're going to see banks start to close. And remember, I said there is no regulation here on telling a bank that they have to give someone their entire savings, that they have to put their money where their mouth is, that they have to make good on all of the savings that they have. And because of that, you're going to see a huge loss of some people's whole life savings, and it creates this distrust in the banks. Because we're going to see this kind of ripple effect of the stock market crash. When you have people who are on unemployment, now you're going to see people defaulting on loans. You're going to see a failure of the buying on credit system because of these layoffs and these cut wages. if you got laid off during this time, there was nothing to help you. There is no unemployment payment that you're going to get. There is nothing. You cannot ask for help because help didn't exist during this time. So when we have layoffs and we have wages being cut, we have high unemployment, which leads to less spending, which just drives us further into this depression. This is where things get pretty dark, guys. I apologize. But this is going to drive middle class Americans to soup kitchens and charity lines because that's the only help that existed at this time, the charity of other people in the United States. Uh, well, I'm not going to blame the whole Great Depression on the banks. A very large chunk of the failure that we see of the Depression comes from the failure of the banks. And we had Hoover. Oh boy. Hoover is not going to be the guy that we need when the depression hits. But I'll tell you, he had some faith. Hoover is going to be the former Secretary of Commerce. He is the Republican nominee in 1928. Um, so we're kind of backtracking a little bit here. When Hoover's running in 1928, he says the nation's going to continue the prosperity and the peace instilled by the Republican Party. His slogan, and it is absolutely laughable now, his slogan is, "I see no fear for the future of our country." Okay. He thought that he was going to continue prosperity and peace. Everything's going to be great. He thought, I'm inheriting a great economy because on the outside, things truly did look good. They truly did seem positive. But 7 months after he wins the election, the stock market's going to crash. And what he's going to respond with is everything that he knew from the Republican conservative policies, which is respond with limited government involvement. This problem will fix itself. Uh, and again, look at these posters. Vote for Hoover. Don't change now. Keep the Republicans because we were doing so great. The wise old bird says, Hoover. Of course, people were going to go with the Republican Party nominee. Everything just like, and I feel like I'm repeating myself so many times over, just like during the Gilded Age, everything looked great on the outside, but we had zero idea what was coming. So Hoover wins. Stock market crashes. Hoover's response, let's rely on the wealthy. It's going to be fine. Wealthy Americans could voluntarily supply goods and the money to those in need. We'll combat the depression. Everything will be great. But that's not the situation that we find ourselves in. Instead, the wealthy just keep hoarding their money. And more people are going to lose their homes because they can't make payments. We're going to see a huge increase in homelessness throughout the United States. And what ends up happening is people build these shanty towns out of, whatever supplies they could find. You have these just shack houses being built up around the nation, and they deem themselves with the name Hoovervilles to kind of point the finger right straight back at Hoover and say, you have done this to us with your lack of response from the government. But Hoover's just doing what he knew. Hoover attempts the trickle-down economics practice of allowing money to remain at the top in hopes that the economic pyramid would help solve the problem of the extreme poverty at the bottom, but it doesn't work. The Hoover Dam is going to be an idea that Hoover comes up with many years before he becomes president. He starts kicking around the idea in the early 1920s of building a dam. This dam isn't going to be created or finished, I should rather say, until 1935, which isn't going to be until FDR's presidency. But when the dam starts to be built when it starts to come to fruition, that idea, it is going to provide jobs. So this initial idea of providing jobs through government programs is going to be there, but the scale of it is not there. The scale that we needed to get employment for the masses is not going to be there. Great idea. It will become a national historic landmark. It's going to generate electricity for over 1 million homes. It is going to be a great contribution to the United States, but at the time we needed more. We needed more from the presidency to provide employment for a larger number of people. So what we're also going to see that doesn't really help Hoover at all, the bonus army of 1932. In 1924, Congress is going to reward veterans of World War I with certificates redeemable in 1945 for $1,000 each. Now, $1,000 is a lot of money. By 1932, though, many of these former servicemen had lost their jobs, their whole life savings because of the Depression, because of the crash. And they're going to come to Congress and say, can we redeem our bonus certificates early? They're going to be led by a guy named Walter Waters of Oregon, and he is going to lead the so-called bonus expeditionary force that's going to head to the nation's capital. They're going to hitch rides, they're going to hop trains, they're going to hike, and they are going to make their way to the nation's capital, and they will gain the name the Bonus Army. And they're going to be about 50,000 strong. So there's about 15,000 of them in the nation's capital in June of 1932. Uh, Hoover is going to refuse to address them, which is not great. And the veterans are going to say, well, we'll wait. And the audience that the veterans do find are congressional delegates. And soon the debate is going to hit Congress on whether to give the bonus army what they demand or to ignore them. As the deliberation continues on Capitol Hill, though, the bonus army, they're not really going to have anywhere to go. They don't have jobs to go back to. They don't have homes to go back to. So what they do is they build up a shanty town across the Potomac River. And when the Senate eventually rejects their idea on June 17th, the veterans, some of them do return home, but several thousand of them are going to remain in the capital with their families. Like I said, they don't have anywhere else to go. The bonus army isn't going to be wild and crazy. They're going to be unarmed, but they're going to kind of hang on the White House lawn, on the Capitol's lawn, and that's not a great look. The nation and many people around are going to perceive them as a threat to national security. On July 28th, we're going to have Washington police start to try to clear the demonstrators, but 2 men are going to be killed as tear gas and bayonets are what the bonus marchers get met with. Fearing that this thing is going to get worse, Hoover is going to order an army regiment into the city under the leadership of General Douglas MacArthur. The army, complete with an infantry, cavalry, and tanks, roll across the shanty town to try to get the bonus army to flee. MacArthur was then ordered that the shanty settlements be burned. Americans are going to see where former World War I veterans were living, burning to the ground, former soldiers being tear gassed, and the nation is going to be outraged. And they're going to say, how the heck could you treat Army veterans with such disrespect? Hoover is going to say, nope, I thought they were political agitators, anarchists, communists. I was scared of them. I thought they were a threat to the nation. But it's not that great. The numbers don't look good for Hoover. 9 out of 10 of the bonus marchers were veterans. 20% of them were disabled. And Up to this point, the Bonus Army was the largest march on Washington, and Hoover and MacArthur look like big old dum-dums here. And this is all happening when Hoover is set to campaign for re-election in the same summer. But his actions against the Bonus Army are going to sour the public's opinion and push him even further to the bottom. People just don't like Hoover because America sinks deeper into the Depression under his watch. Now, in class this week, we're gonna try to turn things around and get a little bit more positive with a new approach to the Great Depression. Don't forget about the assignments that you have for this week. Journal 23, Great Depression New Deal document analysis. Remember, follow those directions. And you have the fireside chat evaluation. Don't forget about those readings for Unit 9. Any questions on anything, you let me know.